You shouldn't be standing near the bar. The investors don't need to see that. That was what my brother's girlfriend said to me at 7:58 on a Thursday evening. In a voice just low enough that only I could hear it. She didn't look at me when she said it. She was scanning the rooftop terrace, cataloging guests, checking sightlines like a general surveying a battlefield. Her dress cost more than my first car. Her smile, when she turned it on the room, could power a small city. She glanced at me once, briefly, the way you glance at a smudge on a window, before deciding not to bother wiping it. Stay near the catering table, she added. You'll be more comfortable there. Then she walked away, and the crowd absorbed her like she belonged to it. I didn't move toward the catering table. I looked at my watch. 7:58. I set a quiet deadline in my head. By 8:15. Every person on this rooftop would know exactly who I was. Before I tell you what happened at 8:15, I want to know something. Drop a comment right now and tell me where you're watching from and what time it is there. I want to see how far this reaches. I didn't follow her. I didn't find a corner to disappear into. I picked up a glass of sparkling water from a passing tray, turned my back to the bar, and watched my brother work the room. He looked magnificent. That's the honest truth, and I won't pretend otherwise. He moved through the crowd with the ease of someone who had rehearsed this moment for years, because he had. My brother had been practicing this version of himself since he was 19 years old, standing in front of a bathroom mirror, reciting his elevator pitch to his own reflection. He had a gift for presence, for filling a room, for making whoever he was talking to feel like the only person on earth. It was real, and it was earned, and I had never once begrudged him for it. What I had done, quietly and without acknowledgement, was fund it. The rooftop terrace belonged to the Meridian Club, 42 floors above the financial district. The kind of venue where the waitstaff wore earpieces and the flower arrangements cost more per table than most people's rent. The kind of place that sent invoices that required 2 signatures and a wire transfer. My brother had booked it for his company's official launch party. A celebration of 3 years of work finally reaching the moment where outside capital was coming in and the product was real and the future felt inevitable. 200 guests. Venture partners, press, early customers, family, friends. Everyone who mattered in a 30-mile radius. My brother's girlfriend, Vanessa, had organized every detail personally. Guest list, seating, florals, catering, the photographer who moved through the crowd like a quiet current. She had a talent for logistics, the way some people have a talent for music. She could see the whole system at once, every variable, every moving piece, and she could manipulate them with a precision that was almost beautiful. She had also, I noticed, placed my name on the standing list rather than the seated guest list. Not that it bothered me, I preferred to move. I found my position near the east railing, where the city spread out below like a circuit board. I set my water glass on the railing, and took stock of the room. I spotted the 3 partners from Westfield Capital immediately. They were clustered near the presentation wall, holding their drinks at chest height, doing that particular kind of listening, where you're really evaluating. These were the men my brother had been chasing for 14 months. These were the signatures on the term sheet that had been signed 2 weeks ago, the ones that had triggered tonight's celebration. I knew their faces because I had looked them up. I knew their investment history and their exit preferences and the company they'd passed on 4 years ago that had since returned 12 times. I knew these things because when my brother had come to me 3 years ago with a prototype and a pitch deck and a number he needed to get started, I had done the math. I had run the diligence. I had made the decision with my own head, not my heart, even though my heart was also in the room. What I had told him was this. I can help you with the seed capital. I'll do it through a holding company. It'll be cleaner that way, better for your cap table when you go to raise. What he had heard was, my sister helped me get started. What he had apparently told Vanessa was something different, or perhaps nothing at all, because the way she looked at me across the terrace suggested she had assembled a very specific and very wrong picture of who I was. She saw a younger sister who worked a quiet job in finance. She saw someone who wore sensible shoes and drove a 4-year-old sedan and showed up to family events holding grocery store wine. She saw someone who occupied the background of photographs, who didn't ask for credit, who never raised her voice. She did the math the way people like Vanessa always do the math. She saw the path of least resistance, and she walked it. The moment that crystallized everything had happened 40 minutes earlier, before the event officially opened, when the guests were just beginning to arrive and the energy on the terrace was still loose and warm and anticipatory. I had been standing near the entrance, watching the skyline turn gold as the sun pulled away from it, when Vanessa materialized at my elbow. She had a headset around her neck and a tablet in one hand, and the particular expression of someone managing 17 things at once. I need a favor, she said, and her tone made clear it wasn't a request. Of course. What do you need? The Westfield partners are arriving in about 10 minutes. She gestured vaguely toward the main terrace. Your brother needs to be free to receive them without distraction. Family can sometimes be a lot. You know, just for the first hour. She gave me a brief smile, the kind that doesn't reach the cheeks. It would really help if you could just hang back. I looked at her. Hang back where? She nodded toward the far end of the terrace, past the main presentation wall, and the stage photo backdrop, where the catering crew had set up their staging area. A row of folding tables covered in white linen. Trays being loaded and unloaded. Staff moving in organized patterns. There's plenty of room over there, she said. And you won't be in anyone's way. Then she was gone before I could answer, already moving toward the entrance to greet the first arrivals. I had stood very still for a moment. Then I took my water glass to the east railing, checked my watch, and began counting down from 17 minutes. My brother was 31 years old. He had built something real. I wanted to be clear about that because what came next is not a story about tearing someone down. His company, a platform that used predictive modeling to reduce supply chain waste for mid-size manufacturers, had genuine utility and genuine momentum, and the term sheet from Westfield represented genuine outside judgment that the idea had merit. My brother had done the work. He had hired the right people, made the right bets, survived the moments when it almost died. But he had not done it alone, and the people in that room did not know the full picture. 3 years ago, he had needed $300,000 to build the first version of the product and hire 2 engineers for 18 months. He had gone to 4 different people before he came to me, and all 4 had said no. When he finally sat across from me at my kitchen table with his laptop open and his pitch practiced to smoothness, I had listened for 2 hours, and then I had asked him to leave the deck with me. I spent 4 days running the numbers. I called 2 people I trusted who knew the space. I slept on it. And then I called him and said yes. The capital came from Sablebridge Holdings, a company I had structured 2 years earlier, as a vehicle for exactly this kind of early-stage investment. My name did not appear on the term sheet. The equity stake, 11% of his company at seed valuation, sat on the Sablebridge cap table. My brother knew Sablebridge was mine. The Westfield partners did not. This was not deception. This was structure. Standard, legal, common. The kind of thing that gets set up by attorneys and signed by accountants and filed with the state. The kind of thing you don't explain at dinner parties because it takes 20 minutes and people's eyes glaze over. The problem was that Vanessa had apparently decided that because I was quiet and drove a sensible car and didn't interrupt conversations, I was the family mascot. The tolerated sibling. The one you seat at the catering table, so she doesn't confuse the venture partners. I thought about the winter 2 years before my brother's launch. My parents' house had gone 90 days delinquent on the second mortgage. My father had called me on a Sunday morning, voice tight in the way it only got when things were genuinely bad. He had explained the number. He had not asked directly, because he never did, but the silence after the explanation was its own kind of asking. I had transferred the amount from my own account that afternoon. My parents stayed in their house. No one discussed it at Christmas. I ate noodles for 2 weeks because the transfer had cleaned out my liquid cushion, and I didn't touch my investment accounts for things like groceries. I thought about the call 8 months before that, when my brother's prototype had a critical flaw, and the lead engineer he'd hired had quit without notice, and he needed a bridge to cover payroll for 6 weeks while he found a replacement. He called me on a Wednesday at 11 at night. I wired the money Thursday morning. I thought about the previous 4 years during which I had worked 70-hour weeks building a portfolio of early-stage investments and one significant commercial real estate position, operating entirely under holding company names, because I had learned early that when people know you have resources, they stop seeing you and start seeing a problem they'd like solved. I had built a careful life. I had built it quietly. I had not told my brother the full scope of it because I knew him, knew the way his eyes changed when money entered the room, knew that the sister he came to for advice would become something else if he understood the actual balance sheet. And I had not told Vanessa anything because Vanessa had never asked me a single question about my life. In 8 months of my brother dating her, she had asked me about myself exactly once, at a family dinner, and it was to confirm that I was the younger sister. Yes, I had told her. I'm the younger sister. She had nodded, and turned back to my brother with a laugh about something else entirely. At 8:07 I moved. Not toward the catering table. Toward the presentation wall, where my brother was standing with the 3 Westfield partners, and 2 members of his board. I walked steadily, no hurry, no performance. Just a woman crossing a terrace. Vanessa saw me coming from across the room. Her expression shifted in a way she probably didn't know was visible. She began moving on an intercept path. Tablet still in hand, headset still around her neck. We arrived at the same moment. Hey, she said. And her voice had that bright, hollow quality of someone managing an unexpected variable. I don't think this is the right time to. My brother turned at the sound of her voice. His eyes found me, and he smiled, easy and genuine, the way he always did. He had a real smile, my brother. It was one of the things I had always loved about him. There she is, he said. He pulled me into a quick one-armed hug. Guys, this is my sister. Sharp as anyone in this room, honestly. Vanessa's smile went ceramic. The tallest of the 3 Westfield partners extended his hand. He introduced himself. We shook hands. He had the kind of handshake that communicates genuine attention, which told me something useful. What do you do? He asked. I'm in early-stage investment, I said. And some real estate. His eyebrows moved slightly upward, the small recalibration. What kind of real estate? Commercial. Distressed assets mostly. I find properties that are undervalued or over-leveraged, restructure them, and either operate or exit, depending on the opportunity. He looked at me with the particular focus of someone who has just realized a conversation they treated as small talk is actually interesting. He mentioned a building I would know, a mixed-use property 2 blocks south that had gone through a complicated receivership the year before. I knew the building. I knew the receivership. I knew who had ultimately taken the position and at what price, because I had been outbid by $14,000 and had spent an afternoon being genuinely annoyed about it. We talked for 7 minutes. My brother stood beside me looking pleased and slightly confused. The expression of someone watching a scene they didn't expect but are glad is happening. Vanessa stood 2 feet away, looking at her tablet with a focus that had nothing to do with what was on the screen. When the conversation paused naturally, the partner looked between my brother and me and said, "Your sister's been in the room this whole time?" My brother laughed. "Yeah. She doesn't exactly advertise." The partner said something to his colleagues in a low voice. Then he looked back at me. "We should talk properly. Are you around this week?" I said I was. And that was when Vanessa stepped forward. She put her hand on my brother's arm and leaned close to him with a smile still pointed at the group and said, with a brightness that was almost convincing, "We actually have a seating area set up for family over. My name is on the cap table," I said. The sentence landed like a stone into still water. I said it calmly and without drama, looking at the Westfield partner because he was the person it was relevant to. Not loudly. Not for the room. Just clearly. The partner looked at my brother. My brother looked at me. "Sable Bridge Holdings," I said. 11%, seed round, 3 years ago. The partner's expression shifted into the attentive neutrality of someone doing fast math. He looked at his colleague on the right. His colleague nodded, very slightly. "You're Sable Bridge," the partner said. "I am." Vanessa's hand had gone still on my brother's arm. My brother said my name. Just once. A single syllable. I heard 3 years of assumption, and one very sudden revision all compressed into it. I didn't look at Vanessa. I kept my attention on the conversation in front of me, because that was the relevant thing. "Sable Bridge is on the cap table," the partner said again, not as a question this time. He looked at my brother. "You didn't mention your sister was the seed investor." My brother opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. "She runs it under the holding company name," he said. "It's, He looked at me. "I didn't realize you'd want to," he stopped. I gave him a small, even look. Not cold. Just clear. "Is that the extent of it?" the partner asked, and his tone was careful, the tone of someone making sure they have the full picture before they commit to an interpretation. "No," I said. I reached into my clutch. I pulled out my phone, opened the document I had prepared that morning, the one I had not been certain I would use tonight, but had brought because preparation is a habit, and habits are just decisions you've made ahead of time. I turned the screen toward the group. It showed the corporate structure chart for Sable Bridge Holdings. 2 subsidiary companies branched from it. The first was the equity position in my brother's company. The second was the management entity for a commercial office building on the same block as the Meridian Club. The building whose lobby my brother's launch guests had walked through to reach the elevators. The building whose 42nd floor terrace he had rented for this evening. "I manage the entity that owns this building," I said. The partner looked at the screen. Looked at my brother. Looked back at the screen. Vanessa made a sound. It wasn't a word. My brother's face had gone through several expressions in rapid succession, and had settled somewhere in the vicinity of stunned. "I understand the rental agreement is under a different name," I continued, "because people often use a management company as the contracting entity for liability reasons. But ownership sits with Sable Bridge. It's public record. I should have mentioned it earlier when the venue was being selected. That's on me." It was not, in fact, entirely on me. I had sent my brother a text 3 months ago when the venue was first discussed, asking if he wanted to use my management contact to arrange the space at a preferred rate. He had replied immediately, enthusiastically, and we had discussed it briefly over the phone. He had mentioned it to Vanessa, as a connection his sister had. Whether Vanessa had understood what that meant or had simply not cared to ask, I could not say. I didn't say any of that. It wasn't the point. The point was that the partner was now looking at me with an expression I recognized because I had worn it myself when I discovered something I should have seen earlier. It was the expression of someone recalculating. He looked at Vanessa, who was still standing 2 feet away, tablet held in both hands now, not looking at any of us. He looked back at me. "There's a third document," I said. "But that one is a family matter. I don't think it's relevant to this conversation." He nodded. "Once. Understood." I put my phone back in my clutch. I looked at the partner. "Should we find somewhere to sit? This conversation might take a few minutes." His colleague on the right was already smiling. We sat. We talked for 40 minutes. My brother joined us for the first 20, and it was one of the better conversations I could remember having with him in years, the kind where you both stop performing and just think out loud together. He was sharp. He was genuinely sharp, and I wanted that on the record. Vanessa did not join us. At some point, I became aware that she had left the terrace entirely. I don't know exactly when. She was there and then she wasn't, the way a weather system moves through and you only notice after the temperature has changed. I didn't chase her. I didn't need to. The conversation I was having was the point. When the partners eventually moved on to work the rest of the room, my brother and I were left alone for the first time all evening. We stood at the east railing, the city below us the same as it had been 2 hours ago, and he didn't say anything for a long moment. Then he said, "How long?" 3 years, I said. Since the seed. The building? 14 months. The receivership closed early last year. He absorbed this. I watched him do it, watched him fit it over the image he'd had and see where the shapes matched and where they didn't. "I don't understand why you didn't tell me," he said finally. I looked at him. "You know why," I said. He was quiet. "The winter, Mom and Dad almost lost the house," I said. "The bridge payroll when your engineer quit. The seed capital. All of it came from accounts you didn't know existed because you're a different person when you know about accounts. You know you are." He turned to face the city. His jaw moved. He was working through something. "Vanessa thinks he started. I know what she thinks. I need to talk to her. That's up to you." He turned back to me. There was something in his face I hadn't seen there in a long time. "Something undefended," I said. "I funded your company because I believed in it. Not as a favor. As an investment. I ran the numbers and I made a decision. That's it. You don't owe me anything beyond what's in the agreement." "That's not," he stopped. "That's not the part I'm trying to figure out." I waited. "I watched you stand at the catering station for 20 minutes, he said quietly. "And I didn't come over." "I know. I thought she was just managing the event. I thought it was a logistics thing." "I know what you thought." He looked at me the way he used to when we were kids, and he'd broken something and knew it, and was waiting to see what it cost. I said, "I don't need an apology tonight. Tonight is your night, and it's a good one. Go back to your guests." He didn't move immediately. Then he said, "The third document." I shook my head. "Family matter." He exhaled. Nodded. Said my name again. This time differently than he had the first time. I tipped my glass at him. "Go." He went. I stayed at the railing for another few minutes, watching the city. Then I took out my phone and opened the document I had not shown the Westfield partners because it was not their business. It showed a promissory note. Borrower. My parents. Lender. Sable Bridge. Balance outstanding. Status, current, because I had never pressed it, had never called it in. Had structured it at below market interest precisely because it was my parents and I was not their creditor so much as their safety net, holding a piece of paper that gave them dignity because they could call it a loan instead of a gift. I looked at that document for a long moment. Then I closed it without doing anything with it and put my phone away. Some debts you don't collect. Some documents you only need to have. The weight of them is enough. I had spent a long time being invisible. I had done it deliberately because I had grown up watching what happened to people who let their resources be seen before their relationships were tested. I had watched my father be generous and resented for it. I had watched my mother loan money to people who stopped returning her calls. I had decided early that I would build quietly and give without announcement and let the work speak in documents rather than conversations. The problem with that strategy is that silence gets misread. People see a quiet person and they write their own story, and the story they write is usually about themselves. They see someone who doesn't push back as someone who can't. They see someone who doesn't announce her assets as someone who doesn't have them. They see the vendor table and they see the help. Bianca had looked at me in my sensible shoes at my brother's launch party and seen a woman who belonged at the catering station. She had calculated, the way people like her calculate, that I was the low-cost option. The easiest target in the room. The person who would absorb the redirect without complicating the evening. She had made an error that was so common it barely surprised me anymore. She had mistaken silence for smallness. The vendor table, I had learned a long time ago, is where the people who actually run the show sit. It's where the owner of the building stands when she wants to watch the room without being watched. It's where you go when you've already made your decisions, and you're waiting for the right moment to let them land. I poured myself a glass of champagne from a passing tray. I thought about whether I was going to file anything, push anything, make any of the administrative moves that the documents in my phone entitled me to make. My parents' loan was current. I had no desire to touch it. My brother's company was legitimate and the Westfield deal was real, and my equity position would be fine. There was nothing to file and nothing to foreclose and nothing to revoke. What had changed tonight was only information. The people in this room knew something they hadn't known when they arrived. That was all. That was enough. My brother found me again an hour later, near the end of the evening, when the crowd had thinned to the people who were genuinely enjoying themselves rather than networking. He came to stand beside me at the railing again and we watched the city the way we used to watch television when we were kids, just comfortably present without needing to fill the space. He said, "She's at the hotel. We're going to talk tomorrow." I nodded. "The partner wants to do breakfast Tuesday," he said. "He specifically asked if you'd be there." I said I could be there. He said nothing for a moment. Then, "You've been doing this the whole time." "Yes." "Buying things. Investing. Running companies." "Yes." "All while I thought you were just." He shook his head. "What did you think I was doing?" "I knew what you were doing. I stayed up to date on your filings. He laughed. An involuntary sound. Of course you did. I smiled. He turned to look at me directly. Not the half profile of people standing at railings looking at views. Fully turned. The way you look at someone when you want to see them clearly. I should have come over to the catering station, he said. You should have, I agreed. He nodded. I know. That was all. No performance of remorse, no extensive apology, no lengthy explanation. Just the acknowledgement, clean and without deflection, the way real things are said, between people who have known each other, their whole lives, and are no longer interested in the alternative. I accepted it, not as settlement for something owed. Just as the truth landing in the right place at the right time. The city below us was doing what it always did, moving and glowing and going about its enormous and different business, and up here on the 42nd floor of a building that was, among other things, mine. My brother and I finished our drinks in the quiet. Power, I had learned, is not a thing you perform in front of an audience. It's not a thing you announce until the announcement is the only remaining option. It lives in documents and structures and decisions made at kitchen tables and wired funds on Thursday mornings and below-market loans to parents who needed to call it something other than charity. It lives in 17-minute countdowns you set on your own watch and don't explain to anyone. It lives in the patience to stand at the railing and let the room figure it out. I set my empty glass on the tray of a passing server. I thanked her by name. Because I knew her name. Because I had made it my business to know the names of the people who ran the show. She smiled, surprised, pleased. I took the elevator down 42 floors. I walked through the lobby of the building, past the front desk where the night manager gave me a nod because he knew who I was, out through the glass doors, into the financial district at 9:45 on a Thursday, the city bright and cold and full of its own momentum. I called no one. I celebrated nothing out loud. The work would continue tomorrow. The investments would compound, or they wouldn't. My brother would have a conversation with his girlfriend that would go one way or another. Tuesday morning, I would sit across from a venture partner and talk about things that mattered to me professionally, and it would either lead somewhere or it wouldn't. None of that was the point of tonight. The point of tonight was simpler and older and more fundamental than any of that. Someone had looked at me and written a story about who I was. And I had waited, quietly and without performance, for exactly the right moment to hand them the correct version. That's it. That's the whole thing. Sometimes the most powerful sentence in any room isn't the loudest one. Sometimes it's the one delivered at the railing to three people who immediately understand its full weight. Sometimes it's a document turned toward the light. Sometimes it's just a name on a cap table that was always there, waiting to be read. I walked to my car. I drove home. I made tea. The debt was noted. The relationship would be renegotiated. Slowly, over time, the way real things are renegotiated. Not with drama and not with a microphone. With a series of small, honest conversations between people who have finally decided to see each other clearly. I was willing to have those conversations. I was also willing to wait until everyone was ready. I had learned to be patient a long time ago, somewhere between the second sweater and the 37th bowl of instant noodles. In the specific silence of someone who is building something real and knows that real things don't need an audience to be true. They just need to be finished.